That's how you finesse. We come for they necks. We come to collect. Did it all on my own, yeah. When it brought it back home, yeah. Now they calling my phone, yeah. But I'm all in my zone. They not a threat.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back, Apex family. We are in my humble abode in Miami. We are not traveling, but much requested. Had a lot of interaction as Jim is going through prep, so we are going to be talking about programming metabolism part 1, because depending on what your start point is going to dictate how we program that metabolism. So part 1, we're going to take this in the context of potentially an athlete or someone who's coming out of an off season and they're going into a contest prep. We will be doing other ones where we have like people who are overweight and insulin resistant, but we're going to take this from someone who's pretty active and going from an off season into a contest prep. And what happens traditionally is generally people will cut calories and increase cardio and increase fat burners all the way to the show and get to the show pretty stressed out and try and force food in at the last minute to fill out for the show. That's just like standard practice. That's a regular bodybuilding prep. It's copy and paste. It's what I was brought up on. My first preps were 3 hours cardio every week. The calories would get cut, the cardio would go up, and the drugs would help save tissue. So I obviously found that was not the best way of doing things. And if you've seen Jamie, like now he's, well, from like 4 or 5 weeks out, he's going out for free meals, he's having cake, he's having extra on top, but that's because we've got his metabolism in a good place. So how do we start that out? If you're coming from an off-season plan, you've got some extra body fat, you're pretty inactive. As I say, conventional wisdom is you get a baseline level of calories and a baseline level of supplementation or, exogenous hormones, and you would build on that, and you would continue to reduce calories and increase cardio. So what I do is completely opposite, and you need to be very attentive so you don't dig a hole and you don't let things run away with you. So from the get-go, we'll have a baseline cycle if someone's assisted. If they're natural, then obviously that's not a variable that we have to play with. But I will start out, and this makes people at the start think, what the fuck's it going to be like at the end? But I start out with a pretty good amount of cardio, and I will get a basic maintenance calories or slightly below, and I'll start with a good hit of cardio. You might start out with 30 or 45 minutes AM and PM, depending on the person, depending how fat they are, how much weight they've got to come off. And why do we do that? Why then? Like, why would we do that? Well, we want to be turning over as much energy as possible, and obviously we're going to be in a bigger deficit while we do that because we're not pushing the calories high. But for a period, we can get away with that. And logically, if you think, when are we going to lose the most tissue? When are we at risk? It's when we have the lowest levels of body fat. So why in the conventional prep, when we're getting to the lowest levels of body fat, the most coaches have their cardio at the highest point. It's almost nonsensical to me when you actually say it out loud and think about it. We lose the most tissue, or are at risk of losing the most tissue, when we are at our leanest point. So why would we be doing the most output at that point? All we want to be doing at that point is sending a stimulus to hold the tissue. And we want our metabolism to be really ramped up so we don't have to do a bunch of extra activity and risk losing tissue. So how we'd start this out is, let's just say we're doing 30 minutes AM and 30 minutes PM from the get-go with the baseline calories, and we just keep running that, and we might get 7 days, 10 days, until I start to see a little bit of flatness coming in, and that's when we'll give a spike. So I normally give a metabolic spike, normally anywhere between 7 and 14 days from the start. Usually it's more towards the 14 because people are just coming out of an off season, they've got a lot of water, Plus they're just putting in some assisted hormones. So we'll just push that for about 10 days, 2 weeks, and then give a little refeed, and that gives you a little metabolic bump. And then we'll just keep repeating that process. And as we go along throughout the prep, those refeeds become closer. And those refeeds at the start, it might just be going out for a free meal. So it'll be a mixed meal, go out and have a little bump in calories, because you don't need a great deal. The deeper you get into a prep, the more food you're going to need. And this is like throwing fuel on the fire. So say we got to that 30 minutes cardio, AM and PM, we're getting to a good point, we're taking some off, maybe I'll bump it up again to 45 minutes and we don't really move the food or the calories. That refeed restocks glycogen and gives everything a little bump. And as we keep going, guys, and going, let's say we carry on this process for 4 or 5 weeks, you have that little break, that social window, which I always like to speak to my clients or my athletes, whether they're an athlete or whether they're a business guy and they want to get into shape, or whether they have families. That window of opportunity, that free meal, is always based around personal situations. So if you want to go out with your girlfriend, your wife on a weekend, we build it in there. If you've got children, you want to go and have ice cream with your children every Sunday, whatever it may be. So we always build it around that. As we keep pushing that down, then those refeeds become closer and closer. As we get more glycogen depleted, it will start to be an increase, like a refeed day, where it's more carbohydrates and then maybe a free meal on top. But what you'll find as those get closer together, the metabolism is getting faster and faster. And when I get to a point where it's like, okay, now we're needing to refeed maybe twice a week and we've really got things cranking, that's when I'll start to pull down the cardio and maybe move up the base level food. So now you can already see we've gone from maybe having a refeed or a free meal. I don't call it a cheat meal, it's a free meal, because it's part of a plan. We're not going off plan. I'm planning these free meals. So it might have been 14 days. After 2 weeks of dieting, we're down to 7 days. Then we notice it's flattening out. It might be down to 5 days. And then it's like, okay, let's start removing some cardio. So we're getting back up to that 7-day mark, and we run that through. We also have the training as a variable. So I will not increase the volume. We'll have a set line base level volume for training structure, generally the same as the off season. And that's something else we've got to play with. So with Jamie, as we've got closer to the show, his intensifiers have come out, only one intensifier per session. His volume's come down, his cardio has come down. Jamie's now doing 20 minutes, probably on average 5 times a week, which is nothing. And he's going out for meals every week and refeeding every week. We're actually on the back of a 4-day refeed with 2 free meals, and he's doing the same again. So I've done this like 3 times already. So it's a little bit of an overview on how to structure things. I will get out on a whiteboard, and if someone wants to send a case study in or send in how they are set now and how I'll program that, then feel free. I will choose one person from the comments below and have them send in their diet, and we'll run through a scenario. But what I really just want to get a little bit of a message across is really change the way you think about going into a diet or going into a contest prep, and think about what are we trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve maximum amount of muscle tissue, and we're trying to get as lean as possible. If there's exogenous hormones in the mix, you can and probably will gain tissue throughout doing this, because when you're running close to flat, you are very insulin sensitive, and your ability to partition nutrients is phenomenal. So as long as you're on top of this and you don't go too flat for too long, and this is the biggest mistake I see. If any of your coaches, if you're an athlete, you have a coach, if any of your coaches are only checking in with you once a week in contest prep, especially when you get into the tail end, fire them. Because if you program metabolism quickly, your body is going to change on the daily. Like, that's why I stopped coaching. If I'm being brutally honest, because it took too much of my time, because I invest a lot of time. I would be having check-ins every single day, and I just couldn't handle it with the business, Project AD, Professor Nuts, all the other business stuff. it's just too much, it's too time consuming. So if your coach isn't doing that and isn't on you, then you probably need to look for another coach, because you're probably just being drilled. I know there's going to be a lot of people who are watching this thinking, shit, I just did more cardio all the way to the show and my food just kept getting pulled. Hopefully this is going to get a lot of people's attention and you're going to ask a lot of questions, because it's easier for me to do it with a scenario or with someone actually, to talk about a case study. But if you imagine like what we just spoke about here is we're getting cardio, that is what we're going to do to increase energy expenditure. Our calories are going to be at maintenance or slightly below, and we're going to ride that out. The body will adapt. This is very individual. This is something that most people don't talk about as well. They don't understand that the individual person or client may have a highly adaptive metabolism or not very adaptive metabolism. If someone has a highly adaptive metabolism, then that's going to need more frequent bumps in food, changes in energy expenditure, up and down, because it will quickly learn what you're trying to do. Whereas some people are generally probably more gifted people, they can just flatline and they will continue to consistently lose body fat all the way through. But I know I'm speaking to probably the majority that you hit a sticking point quite frequently. And that's when your coach doesn't know what to do and you just end up hiking more fat burners or more cardio or pulling more and more calories. And if you are highly adaptive on the metabolic front, and that starts happening maybe 12, 14 weeks out, where do you have to go? Because you're going to play all of your cards by 6 weeks out. And this is how you're going to end up being completely strung out and lose muscle and have an inability to fill out. The inability to fill out is also something which this takes care of. Why did we do 4 days of filling up with Jamie? We didn't run him too flat, but as flat as I wanted him. And when you have a good amount of muscle, I'm speaking to guys who have a good amount of tissue. Your large muscle groups do not fill out with one refeed, with one free meal. They need 2, 3, 4 days of increased energy intake and reduced expenditure. Because what are we doing? We are programming the body. We are talking to our body, which is in a highly stressed state, to say, calm the fuck down. There is not a shortage of food. There is energy here. You can chill. That body fat that you're holding on to because you're really fucking scared that there's no more food coming, chill. There's a lot of food here. So 1, 2, 3, 4 days of an abundance of food. And it's not going all you can eat. It's just going above maintenance with a little bit extra on top. It's that simple. Your body calms down and relaxes. You get a little bit of a mental break as well, because you can make that into a social event, going out 1, 2, 3 times, and get a little break mentally from prep and mentally from the same food in, day out, if your coach isn't changing those sources for you. So you will fill out. So we did it with Jamie at like 4 weeks out. We're just doing it again now. When you get to 2 weeks out, if you're running flat, you've got to get on top of your metabolism, because especially the big guys, if you try and carb up at the last minute in the last 2 or 3 days with just clean carbohydrates, with a low fat approach, your body is just gonna burn through that. And I guarantee you have seen or experienced yourself in a prep where you get on stage, you cannot fill out. If you do fill out, after a couple of rounds of posing, you are completely flattened out. And that is why, because your metabolism has run away with you and you're just burning through those carbohydrates. I don't know why so many of you people are scared of dietary fat. And there's a lot of coaches, a lot of influencers and people who are putting information out on YouTube now who are really saying you don't need fat, you've got exogenous hormones, you need dietary fat really to help with metabolism. You have intracellular triglycerides as well that will give you a level of fullness and hold fullness for longer. It'll give you a different look and more density. And
your body can create all the fat that it needs. You can turn glucose into fat.
yeah, okay, great. It doesn't have the same look. It doesn't have the same look. And the type of fat also is very important. So if we're talking about a metabolic response that we want, in the context of a normal everyday person, and this is why saturated fat got demonized so much, because if I give you a starch, a carbohydrate with saturated fat, especially if it's extremely long chain, it has a high amount of stearic acid in there or a good amount, that's going to create short-term insulin resistance at a cellular level. If you wore a CGM, you would get a rise in blood glucose, and if it was with highly saturated fat, that glucose would stay elevated for a long period. If you use polyunsaturated or monounsaturated fat, your glucose would go up and it would come down. That's why people say, oh, polyunsaturated fats are great, because they're keeping more insulin sensitive. That's basically because across the electron transport chain, the saturated fats, especially the long chains, they inhibit the ability for other things to get into the cell. So the glucose stays in the bloodstream for longer. So your body needs to crank out more insulin. Your pancreas crank out more insulin to deal with that. And that's how you get pre-diabetic type 2 and then eventually type 1 diabetics. But that's for everyday people. But when we're trying to create a metabolic response and we want the body to really be cranking, having some saturated fat in those free meals and really getting the body to crank is highly beneficial. But again, I don't see this being talked about. It's very strange to me that no one actually looks at nutrition, and they really just rely on exogenous hormones and running someone's body into the ground and having them in a stressed state when they get on stage. When you get on stage, you want your body to be completely relaxed, not stressed at all. And that's done with rest, managing output, and managing food intake, and obviously the types of food. So I'm just going to leave this kind of brief for part 1. I will talk a little bit about if you're highly overweight as a part 2 and very insulin resistant. Remember, this is insulin sensitive, so you can run your carbs from the get-go. We're just going to use cardio as our way of keeping insulin sensitive and increasing energy output. When you're insulin resistant, that's a whole different ballgame. So hopefully there's some key points from here that you can take from this, especially if you're an athlete. I'm sure that many of you have been burnt out at the end of prep. Many of you have probably had the inability to carb up and feel full. And many of you may have stepped on stage and felt completely shit and fucking distended. And why do you feel distended? Because you're cramming a shit ton of food into those last 2 or 3 days to try and fill your body out. And it doesn't work like that. Your body can only process so much food. So 2 weeks out, 10 days out, eat in an excess for 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 days. Get your body to completely fill out, and then you can dip for 4 or 5 days free depletion. And I guarantee to every single one of you, when you go to carb up that second time, when you're going to step on stage, you will hold fullness. You will carb up on a lot less carbohydrates than you would have done. And because you're carving up on less food, and you're holding your fullness, you are not going to have a distended stomach. Your waist will be very tight. So, I'm going to leave that one there. I want comments. I want questions, and feel free. If you want to send me your particular scenario, or you've been through it and how would I troubleshoot that, and let everybody see how we would troubleshoot that or run through a prep, then please do so. I'm going to choose someone. So if you want that one to be you, then make sure it's good. But comment, like, and subscribe. I'm here to try and help you guys stop making mistakes that I personally have made and mistakes that I see all of these so-called coaches who are not nutritional experts. They know nothing about nutrition. They know numbers. Your body's not a fucking calculator. They know numbers, and they know drugs, and they know how to put you on a treadmill. Learn how to work with your body, learn how to get your metabolism cranking, and learn how to make prep sustainable, how to enjoy your prep, and be able to do show back to back to back to back. Because guess what? Once that metabolism is programmed and you're not in a stressed state at the show, you can easily roll over and do it again because you've carved up for the show, you've done the show, you go out and you have a meal with your family, whatever, afterwards, and guess what? We're back to baseline, we run low again, then we pick up again, and it's replicable. And that's why you probably don't need a huge amount of hormones either. But what do we see? We see more hormones, more cardio, less food, stressed body, distended stomach, bad experience, competing once a year, massive rebound, get fat, mental problems, body dysmorphia, unsustainable, game over.